Oh, God. Technology fail. Yeah. Here's the presentation. Will that do? Sorry about that. I've never, ever done a talk where there wasn't some sort of technology fail. So, I've got to the stage, I don't do demos anymore. I just talk about them, and then I still can't get Google Slides to work. So there you go. I have, I'll introduce myself quickly because it probably tells the story. I used to be a software developer. Then about 10, 15 years ago, I started working for ThoughtWorks, and I stopped being a software developer and I started being someone who was more interested in organizing and making the conditions right for people to write software. And then I sort of fell into doing platform work while I was still at ThoughtWorks because platform teams weren't as well organized as software engineering teams. And then in my last full-time role, I ended up being head of security because we couldn't afford one, so I had to learn about security. And then the guy that I'd made redundant as head of security because we were running out of money started to pitch me to come and work with him. Which is what I now do. So I spend my working life trying to organize security teams and make them more mature. So that's what I do. That's what Foro does, which is the company that I partner with. That's enough of a sales pitch. We'll come back to that later. There's a marketing slide. That is all the marketing you'll see from me. So when I started doing security, I started listening to a lot of podcasts about security, started reading a load of books. I find it absolutely fascinating. It's so cool. So I haven't done a conference talk since before the pandemic. My life changed during the pandemic. I got divorced. I got remarried. I had more kids. So I've sort of said to my current partner, I'm not going to do any of this abroad stuff. So I said, in the UK, it's just down the road from where I live. So here I am. So, I'm going to tell a story. Judging by the number of the people in the room, I guess we'll find out whether that was a good story if you're still all here in 45 minutes' time or whether you've all left, voted with your feet. So, firstly, I always used to start with a quiz. Can anybody guess what those four things have got in common? Isabella Stewart Gardner Museum, Bank of Bangladesh, Sky Mavis, and Bybit. I mean, the clue's in the question, really. Yep, they've all, big robberies, right? So, Isabella Stewart Gardner Museum, lost around about, according to estimates, $500 million worth of art. At the time, it was called the biggest ever robbery. Bank of Bangladesh got robbed for $1 billion. We'll come on to that, but recovered most of it. Sky Mavis, this is one I'm going to focus on. $630 million. Thought to, by some reckoning, the biggest single victim robbery there's ever been. Obviously, crypto crime as a crime generates more cash than that, but that's at the time, which was 2022, the biggest robbery involving one attacker and one victim, until, and this changed what this story arc was going to be, Bybit. This hack, if you've read about it, this happened back in March of this year or February of this year, so it's hot off the press. So I'm going to talk about those and then take you through some sort of consequences. Firstly, everybody's heard of Bitcoin, right? So just for context, what is Bitcoin? It's a decentralized digital currency. It's been around since 2008. The key point being they said it was anonymous. This was part of the original reason for it. It was, hey, I want to transact without going through banks. We'll come back to that. It's legal tender in El Salvador, oddly. I don't know why El Salvador. I think because they were probably pegged to the dollar before. Most people see it as an investment, so I'll give you a quick investment story. That's the current price. I took that screenshot a couple of days ago, 72,000 in GBP, so that's about 100,000 US dollars. That's a day. What's happened in the last month is that. So you can see it's gone from 60,000 to over 70,000. So that's 17% in a month. Great return if you bought it then. This is what it's done over 6 months. I thought this was quite useful to illustrate how volatile it is. It's gone up to nearly 90 at one point and as low as 60. So it's pretty volatile as an investment. Then what's the significance of this graph? Over 5 years, crikey, look, it started down at 10, now it's up to 70. That's a pretty damn good investment, you'd say. And then the significance of this one is this date here, because this is when I joined the ThoughtWorks gig in Darlington. And two of the people that worked on that gig said to me, you've got to buy this Bitcoin stuff. And I said, nah, bullshit. It's It's a bubble. It's going to burst. I'm not paying. Well, how much is it? 5,800. They said, but it'll go to 10,000. It will go to 10 soon. I was like, no, I'm not getting involved in that. Great decision, eh? Fantastic. So, is it an investment? Is it a massive bubble? I kind of think it has all the hallmarks of a bubble. But then on the other side of the coin, excuse the pun, didn't mean that. It might be a bubble, it might not be, but it's not underpinned by any real assets. So I do wonder, but secretly I hope it crashes because I haven't bought any at that price, but hey. Or other people would tell you it's a massive environmental disaster. The computation that goes into it, I once saw a whole talk about this, like maybe 5-6 years ago. It must have been before the pandemic because I haven't been to a conference since then. The amount of energy that goes into Bitcoin mining and the blockchain and transacting is immense. I've got to put my glasses on here because I got this stat yesterday. According to a report from the Cambridge Centre for Alternative Finance, Bitcoin currently uses 0.5% of all the world's electricity consumption. Wow. That is incredible. Okay. Finally, is it just a facilitator of organised crime? It certainly helps with organised crime. We'll come on to why. By the way, when I'm saying Bitcoin here, I kind of mean all cryptocurrency because not all of these robberies involve Bitcoin. Has everybody heard of NFTs, non-fungible tokens? Yeah, so I don't need to go into too much detail. Anybody that's nodding probably understands them better than I do. They are kind of credits that say you own something. They're on the blockchain, so they're immutable. I read a story yesterday from a few months ago that Damien Hirst, the British artist, had sold NFTs referring to a piece of art he did and then theatrically burnt them. So I guess there are some people that bought this piece of art and then it doesn't exist anymore, so only the NFTs exist to represent it. I wouldn't pay money for that, but hey. All right, moving on. Who's heard of the Lazarus Group? More nods, more nods. Okay. I love the Lazarus Group. Well, I mean, not personally. They're great hackers. They are the North Korean state nexus, effectively. Anything that North Korea does to steal money, it needs to steal money because it's ostracized from the world's financial systems. It's the Lazarus Group what did it. Some famous operations, or notorious. The Sony hack. Sony hack's really interesting. Seth Rogen made a film called The Interview, and it's basically a parody of Kim Jong-un. They didn't want that film to be released, the North Koreans, so they basically attacked Sony. It was a massive ongoing campaign, basically big DOS. There were data leaks, all sorts of fallout. Eventually, Sony caved and didn't give it a cinema release. That was in 2014. But then my colleague told me this just yesterday. Actually, it got released on Netflix a couple of months ago. So if you want to watch that film that caused the Sony hack, go onto Netflix. But I must warn you, it fails. My friend's Bogdan, I call it the Bogdan test. If it scores below 6, he never watches it. So maybe it's not that great a film. They did Bank of Bangladesh. We'll come on to that. WannaCry ransomware 2017. That's interesting. It infected over 200,000 computers, mainly NHS stuff in the UK. It's thought that was released accidentally too early because it was incomplete. Although it was claiming to be ransomware, it didn't have unique Bitcoin wallets for the ransom. So fairly early on, people were told, don't do this. It's actually a data shredder. So maybe it was released by accident. Maybe it was an experiment. It was actually a worm. So it spread on its own, exploiting, I think, the Eternal Blue vulnerability, but I could be wrong. I can't remember. Axie Infinity and Bybit we'll come on to. You can see the numbers there. Cool. Yeah, interestingly, North Korea is now the third biggest holder of Bitcoin in the world behind the US government and the UK government, which is fairly interesting. On my notes, there's a massive text there. God knows why I wrote all that. I'm not going to read it. It's probably that actual article from the Times. Yeah, third largest holder of Bitcoin after the governments of the US and Britain. Cool. So that's the Lazarus Group. Axie Infinity. Who's heard of Axie Infinity? I'm expecting fewer hands. Great, I can tell a story that no one's heard before. Fantastic. Axie Infinity was a computer game owned by a company called Sky Mavis. It's one of these games that I will not pretend to understand because I was born in the 1970s. Apparently it's a bit like Tamagotchi. You breed these pets that are called Axies. They go in teams of 3, then you fight another team and you earn, what's it called? It's written on the screen there somewhere. Some smooth love potion. Woof. Wow. Now, all of that is so far so normal, right? The reason why this is an interesting game is because all games have an in-game economy, right? So my daughters used to play Roblox, and that has a thing called Robux. So you can buy Robux with real money and buy things in the game, right? What you can't do is trade Robux back to real currency. So it's a one-way thing, and most games operate like that. And what that means is gamers feel like they're being ripped off, but also there's always a black economy that grows up on the side, right? And there's competing reasons why the developers do that. Mainly it's because they want to make money, but secondly, if they allow real money transactions, I think they'd be subject to like FCA regulation and so on, so they don't really want to do that. What Sky Mavis did was build an in-game economy based on the Ethereum blockchain. So, because Ethereum blockchain, it's crypto assets. The Axies themselves are NFTs, so they're tradable. You can buy and sell them, right? So instead of making the economy closed for their game, they said, hey, it's open to the real world and we'll charge a commission on transactions. So that's how they made the money. And then lockdown happened and the game got so successful that at one point just the game itself was apparently valued at 2 billion US or something. And it was also said to be the most widely played game in the world at some point during 2022, mainly in the Far East. So, why are we talking about that? Well, it's based on the blockchain. I've just been waffling about in-game economies, forgot to move the slide on, never mind. Let's move on to the next one, because I'll come back to the design of Axie Infinity and you'll see why this might have been slightly flawed. Anybody heard of Tornado Cash? Oh, one hand in the room. So, Tornado Cash, it's got a few interesting aspects. It's a crypto mixer, which is a tool that allows you to put some crypto in, and then it issues a smart contract, a bit like a sort of piece of paper that says, yeah, we're holding this on your behalf, and then you can order payments out. Now, they said when they set it up, these three people, this is a privacy tool, right? Because if I go into a coffee shop and buy something with Bitcoin, it's on the blockchain. People will see that I went into that coffee shop. So to a lot of people, the privacy aspect is important. So they set it up as a decentralized autonomous organization, which we call a DAO. And the founders of Tornado Cash felt that they set it up so that it doesn't actually own the money at any point. So it doesn't take custody of the crypto assets that it's going to move on, because the smart contract is the ownership thing, right? So by not taking custody, it being non-custodial, they felt they were outside the laws that make crypto mixers illegal in most jurisdictions, okay? And they continue to maintain that this is a privacy tool, right? So that's Tornado Cash, and you won't be surprised to hear that this comes back into the story later. Okay. What else can I say about Tornado Cash? Not a lot, really. Cool. So what's a smart contract? Do people understand smart contracts? Anybody? Yeah. You could probably explain it better than me then. So this is my understanding of a smart contract. So it's you'll not be surprised to hear that the first two bullet points basically came off Wikipedia. Smart contracts are computer programs that are on the blockchain. So when they go on the blockchain, they will set up the initial conditions. My understanding is that when you set these contracts up, you also specify a certain number of validators, and when the majority of the validators agree that the smart contract can go ahead, it does stuff, right? But the smart contract is it's a promise to run some code, right? So the key point is once it's on the blockchain, it's there forever, right? So the smart contract exists as a contract in that sense. It's going to execute, I think, when people agree to it. Here's a key point. Smart contracts can trigger other smart contracts. So hold on to that idea. So you can kind of see where this is going. The Ethereum blockchain that was, I think, intrinsically linked to how smart contracts work. The Ethereum blockchain is different from the Bitcoin blockchain. It's got, I think, extra functionality. The guy that wrote the original Ethereum protocol himself was sort of connected with Tornado Cash, because he said that he used Tornado Cash. I think he's a Russian national. I could be wrong, but he wanted to donate money to Ukraine after the invasion. So he used tornado cash to obscure the fact that he'd made this donation, because you don't want to be in Russia and people saying, hey, you've donated to the Ukrainian cause, right? So that's a classic example of why that privacy aspect was important to somebody. And it's all managed through smart contracts. So yeah, my understanding, you put some money in Tornado Cash, that then sets up a smart contract with initial conditions, so you can then later trigger it to ping things on, and your balance erodes that way. Okay, moving on. What are we going to talk about next? Let's talk about crime, yeah? Everybody loves true crime stories, don't they? That picture's great, isn't it? Unsplash is fantastic. Royalty-free pictures, as long as you don't click the wrong ones. Right, cybercrime. Anybody heard of Brett Johnson? No? He is known as the original internet godfather. He was a cyber criminal like 20 years ago, before it was really a thing. Set up a company, well, I say company, was Shadow Crew. They originally did credit card fraud. So then eventually he spent 7 or 8 years in a US prison, and then now he does podcasts and he's a security advisor. In fact, he does a lot of work for the feds, for the FBI. So this is one of his famous quotes, right? For cybercrime to happen, there's 3 things. You need to gather data, what OSINT, like various bits of intel. You need to do the crime, and you need to cash out. Gathering data is kind of less dangerous, but probably more laborious. We'll see that in some of these crimes later. Committing the crime, that can be hard, I suppose, but these days, I mean, there are cybercrime as a service gangs all over the place, right? No one writes their own malware. No one writes their own ransomware, right? You can buy that off the shelf. But the hard part is cashing out. Because what have you got after your crime? You've got some stolen stuff. Going back to the first slide about the art gallery robbery, that's the ultimate impossible to launder stuff, right? They've got 13 paintings. Everybody knows what those paintings are. You can't sell them. They're said to be worth $500 million US, but they're unsaleable. So my understanding of what happens to art robberies is, from what I've read and what I've heard, they become sort of big value tokens to represent debts in the crime underworld. So if I've got a stolen Picasso painting with a value on the open market of 30 million, I can give that to another crime lord, as a token of 10 million, say, something like that. And apparently that's how they're used. They're used as security in these big money exchanges. Because you can't even display them in your house, right? Because someone's going to come around and say, oh, isn't that a Rembrandt? Yeah. Anyway, so cashing out that crime is kind of impossible. But then, it's varying degrees of hardness depending on your crime. And law enforcement knows that after any kind of robbery, you follow the money, right? If you don't catch them in the act, there's plenty of opportunities to catch them later. Okay, so that's the anatomy of a cybercrime. Again, I probably should have moved on to this slide, but never mind. Only just getting used to this whole slide next thing, right? This is not how Google Slides work the last time I did a presentation talk. All right, where are we going next? Money laundering. Everybody knows what money laundering is. Traditional money laundering. Who's watched Breaking Bad? Have we all watched that? Yeah. So they literally laundered it, right? They set up a laundrette to be a front business for what they were doing. So the way you launder funds in reality, in most small-scale crime, is you buy a business and you push the cash through it, right? Because you've probably got cash from whatever your crimes were. This article was from just 3 or 4 weeks ago. The NCA, the UK National Crime Agency, basically shut down hundreds of barbershops. Apparently, a high proportion of barbershops were money laundering fronts. And if you listen to my mate Steve Smith, which you're unlikely ever to do, whenever we're going out to the pub and there's like a burger van, and you wonder, what the hell is that burger van doing there? How can that possibly make a profit? Steve always goes, it's a front for drug dealers. Okay, and maybe he's right. I mean, it was ice cream vans in Grand Theft Auto, wasn't it? So that's your traditional way of laundering money. You need a cash business. My sense is that that's probably getting harder, right? Because if you see a business, there used to be a fish and chip shop near where I lived with a sign in the window saying cash only. So that means they're either a front for money laundering, or they're drug dealers themselves, or they're avoiding tax, right? All of which means that I'm not going to shop in there. At least that's the way it is now. Casinos are interesting. We'll come back to them. Believe it or not, casinos are a vector for money laundering. And not owning a casino, although that works also. The American mafia is said to have done that a few times. We'll come back to this, but apparently Baccarat, which is a card game, if you play it properly, if you follow the right odds, you should get out 49% of the money you put in. So you can go into a casino, hand over a wad of cash, and then cash out just a little bit less after an amount of time. You'll have a receipt that's saying, oh, I earned this 50,000 US dollars in a casino. Great, I've laundered it. I'm not sure that would work anymore, but as we'll see, it did work at one point. Okay, Bitcoin. And as I say, other coins are available. How does it come into crime? Well, why is it in crime? Well, it's easy to take payments off Bitcoin, right? So I think we've all heard of the dark web. If you want to buy some drugs, so I'm told, on the dark web, usually you'll pay in Bitcoin, right? Because then it doesn't go through the financial system. So it's relatively anonymous in that sense. The feds are not going to get on your back for buying a 20-pound bag of sweets with Bitcoin. So you accumulate wealth in Bitcoin. It's easier to steal, right? Because again, if you raid a bank vault full of gold bars, that's real weight, right? So it's got this portability, cross-border portability that other currencies don't. So it makes it a really, really attractive tool for criminals, right? To exchange value between themselves. Which is why I kind of feel like it's a bubble. I feel like the criminal fraternity has pushed the price up, right? Because that's where the Bitcoin is mainly used, I think. But you can't buy a car with Bitcoin, right? Or at least not to my knowledge. You can't buy most real stuff. So there comes a point where you have to exchange that Bitcoin back to fiat currency to actually use it, right? So Bitcoin exchanges exist. Bybit is one. But most of them in the world now, you have to go through proper KYC. So in order to get that Bitcoin out, you've got to give ID and everything, right? So if it can be traced back on the blockchain to some criminal activity, you're in trouble, right? It's going to be hard to exchange it legitimately back to fiat currency. So I heard about this Bitcoin cycle in America. So imagine Danny Dealer, he sells some products online for Bitcoin. You can use your imagination what these products might be. At some point, maybe he goes back to the wholesaler, right? So blah, blah, blah. They're transacting in Bitcoin probably, but the wholesaler has to go to source, right? So there are kind of illegal exchanges where you can hand over 100,000 US worth of Bitcoin and they will give you 90,000 US dollars in cash in exchange, right? So then Danny takes the stuff out that he needs to live on to feed his family and buy his Porsche. He must be a big time Danny. And the rest of it buys more product from the manufacturer, right? Because they need cash as well, right? They need to pay the people that work on the farm. They need to pay for transport, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. By the way, I asked my AI to draw that picture, and it said, I can't draw pictures of drugs for you, but if you like, I can draw a picture of white powder that might be flour, might be sugar, or might be something else. I was like, yeah, I'll take the picture of white flour, thanks. And then, of course, the cycle continues. That is going on, right? That's a fact of life, certainly in North America, because the cash flows back down to Mexico and so on. We've all seen Breaking Bad, right? But would have been a bit of a different story if they didn't have those mountains of cash, wouldn't it? If they'd made it 10 years later, because they were constantly hiding it in their house, weren't they? Anyway, so that's Bitcoin in crime. Fascinating subject. So modern money laundering is pretty much all about how do I convert that Bitcoin into fiat currency, right? There's two options. You find a mixer, which is going to be, most mixers are illegal because they hold the funds and probably pretty dodgy. There's a big thing in cybercrime where marketplace holders just they do an exit scam. So at some point, that's how markets, online dark marketplaces either end in an exit scam or a bust. Sometimes both, or sometimes a bust that pretends to be an exit scam. Anyway, or you can go to an illegal exchange to get cash for it, and then it's somebody else's problem. That is what modern money laundering comes down to. Cool, let's talk about the actual robberies. This is the fun part. Bank of Bangladesh. 2016, Bangladesh held its entire foreign currency reserves, about $1 billion US, in the Federal Reserve Bank of New York. Lazarus Group hacked into the Bank of Bangladesh, their head office in Dhaka, probably. They are said to have had an insider because the SWIFT money transfer system was air-gapped. It was in a room on its own. You had to get into that room. And it was a straightforward hardwired connection to the SWIFT system. I've worked with such connections, actually, in a strong room, in a financial services companies. I'm not sure if they're still like that. And they ordered it in various transactions to be transferred to where they wanted it to go. They did it over the weekend of Chinese New Year, so everyone was on holiday. They were planning the heist for over a year. They had the insider and the access for over a year. Once it was discovered, amazing, over a year. Interesting thing about this, they reversed most of the transactions. Only 80 million was eventually lost. That went to the Philippines and was laundered through the casinos in the fashion that I was describing earlier. The reason why it got caught was because one of the target banks that they were sending to had an address on, I think it was Jupiter Street. And at that time, an entirely unconnected bank called the Jupiter Bank had just been sanctioned in America. So that triggered an alarm and an alert, which woke somebody up in America who realized, okay, this is not why this is dodgy, but why would the Bank of Bangladesh be transferring its entire foreign currency reserves in 20 million chunks to all these? So they stopped most of it. So they only got away with about 80 million. That was probably the first time that Lazarus Group got well known. I'm not going to go into that one anymore because it's less interesting. Who read about the Bybit hack? This is just last month. This I do find interesting, so I'm going to go through the steps that they did. How did they steal $1.5 billion US? They did their recon to start with. They felt that the hot wallet supplier called Safe Wallet was the point of weakness. Now, the way that Bybit operates is they have a cold wallet and a hot wallet. Most of their funds are sitting in a cold wallet, which is offline, right? So at any given point, they had up to, well, let's say $1.5 billion, because that was what was stolen, in their cold wallet. But they need a certain amount of liquidity on their exchange to pay out their customers, right, that want to either buy the Bitcoins and Ethereums or sell them. So from time to time, they have to transfer from the cold wallet to the hot wallet. That goes through smart contracts, which are mediated by that company called Safe Wallet. Those are angle brackets. They don't really look like them, but they are. And what happens is you order a transfer, you have to approve the smart contract, then the transfer goes through. So what did Lazarus do? They gained access to Safe Wallet. Interestingly, for a couple of weeks after the breach, there was an argument going on about who got breached. Safe Wallet was saying it was Bybit. Bybit was saying it was Safe Wallet. So it turns out it was Safe Wallet. A developer got breached. And of course, with developer access, and we'll come back to this, you can do a lot of stuff. They then changed the code that generates the smart contracts for people to move stuff out of their cold wallet to their hot wallet. But they didn't do it globally. There was basically a line of code in there that says, if Bybit, do this, right? So they were targeting only Bybit. So at first it was thought to be some kind of, well, it was a supply chain attack, but it wasn't a malicious DLL or somebody hacking into GitHub or whatever. It was this specifically targeted thing. I'm going to just flick to the next. We are actually looking at my, oh no, wait a minute. What, is this it here? Yeah, here we go. Let me get this onto that screen. If you're interested, you can read through this explanation. This is the technical explanation. It's really cool, actually. It shows the flow of the attack. And then effectively, this is the JavaScript they changed. I got to that point and said, I can't be bothered to read anymore. But But the interesting part is lower down, which is this is kind of what they saw in their UIs, right? So how do I get that out of the way? Like that. What then happened in the hack? They prepared a malicious contract and stuck it on the blockchain, apparently 3 days before the attack. So this malicious contract is sitting on the blockchain for 3 days. The next time Bybit did a transaction, so I can't remember how much, they're wanting to transfer maybe, say, 20 million from the cold wallet to the hot wallet. What Bybit saw was it went through, right? Their contract goes through. They can see the 30 million or whatever has gone into their hot wallet. All is good, right? No problem. I just read when I was going through the detail the other day that they didn't notice the hack for 6 days because they'd seen the money move, and then they're like, oh, wow. They robbed $1.5 billion, and it wasn't noticed for 6 days. So meanwhile, of course, this malicious contract, the contract that they agreed to here, remember I said a smart contract can trigger another one. When they agreed to it, when they voted on it, they didn't realize that all of the people that approved the smart contract for the legitimate transfer, it's almost like there's a tiny bit of small print saying, oh, by the way, we're going to execute this other smart contract. No one noticed it. And the reason why they didn't notice is kind of bound up in that other thing that I can't now see on the screen, because it changed the 0 to a 1 in the UI. And the UIs were just jumbles of text. Why? Why did they not think, is this really a sensible way to approve these transactions? $1.5 billion, amazing. There's some cooler detail in that if you want to, look at the technical detail going into that. So how did they cash it out? Well, the money's still being followed, right? So they're going through crypto mixers, shady crypto exchanges, blah, blah, blah. As of March, the last time I heard a report, they'd recovered 3% of the cash, which is what, 40 or 50 million. Is that right? 20% or so is said to be untraceable, so that's at least 400 million, something like that. The other stuff is still visible, which kind of means I think they know which wallets they're in, but they're just waiting to mix it somehow, to obscure it, to break that link in the chain. But of course, you can't freeze a crypto wallet. This is why it's another reason why it's attractive to criminals. All right? You can freeze a bank account, can't freeze a crypto wallet. So it's only when it changes to fiat currency that it kind of becomes exposed. But the North Koreans, they need to get real money, right? The crypto's useless to them. They need to buy whatever, farm machinery probably. So that's Bybit. Axie, right? How long have I got? As I said, everything was based on Ethereum, but one big problem with Ethereum from their perspective, it takes ages to transact for Ethereum, apparently. I've never done it, but it can take up to 10 minutes for one transaction to go through. So when you're running an in-game purchase or an in-game exchange, that's unacceptable. So not just Axie, but other people, what you do is you build a side chain. You effectively replicate the functionality of Ethereum on the side, right? So it's a lot quicker and cheaper. But then you have to reconcile back to Ethereum constantly. So you have to build what they call a bridge. I don't know the exact technical implementation, but it was called the Ronin Bridge. Don't know why they called it Ronin. To me, that was a crap film from the 1990s, but there you go. Other people liked the car chase. I thought, wow. The Ronin Bridge had 9 validators, meaning to approve the smart contract, to do the reconciliation, 5 of the validators had to validate. Sky Mavis kind of knew it would be a target for attacks, so it didn't want to have a majority voting rights. So it controlled 4 of the validators. The other 5 were controlled by 5 external entities that they contracted to do it for them. So for the things to go through, if you pwned their entire network, you still wouldn't be able to get a transaction through. Or so they thought. So you can kind of guess that this is the weak link in the chain, right? All the money flows backwards and forwards through this Ronin bridge. So what did they do? Now, firstly, and we know that this is what happened in this hack. We believe this is how the engineer was compromised in the Bybit hack, but that hasn't really come out of the wash yet. So somebody is offered a job, a great job opportunity. Now, I guess a lot of people in this room are developers. this is becoming an increasingly common attack, right? It is so easy to go onto LinkedIn, discover who your developers are, look at their skills, even work out what tech is in the company. Because if I can see a load of Microsoft engineers, I know you're a Microsoft shop, right? So I want to compromise that company. Who do I go after? I go after the people with big rights, right? Developers are always overprivileged in their accounts. We all know that. You're just like, oh, just give me what I need to do. I've got to do my job. You know, yeah, use sudo where I can record that you use sudo. Anyway, so they get on the phone. They offer him a job. I assume it was a him. Well, it said him in the literature I read. So they do a couple of Zoom calls. Then they say, you need to download this tech test. We've all done this, right? So the tech test might be in a container, right? Be bloody careful. If you're executing container in, whatever, Docker or whatever, that has a lot of rights on your computer. It will have sudo rights. It can do all sorts of stuff. So, hey, I guess you're not going to be surprised when I tell you that installed malware. The developer did not know that they installed malware, right? This is not obvious, right? Because the first thing your malware does is turn off any kind of alarms or whatever. I guess that's a point that it could have been caught, right? What was their IDS system like? What was their EDR like? He just carries on doing the interviews. I don't think he got the job. Unlucky. There was no job anyway. What happens next? Well, they do their recon on the network. They're now on the network. They've got a developer privilege. They can see absolutely everything. Unfortunately, I don't know if you can see, he's supposed to look upset. They discover that they need 5 nodes to do this, but they've only got 4. So they've pwned the whole network, but they've only got 4 nodes. So they still can't do the hack. So they carry on looking. Anybody guess what the next step is? All right, you can't necessarily guess, but I bet you've all done this at some point. There was a developer cred, a developer token, some kind of access to one of those external 5 that had not been cleaned up. They used that. Now they pwned this external entity. What does that mean? They've pwned the Ronin bridge. Wow. So guess what they did next? I'm sure you can probably work it out. They siphoned off 625 million of Ethereum coin and USDC. USDC is what's called a stable coin. It's a token that's linked to the value of the US dollar. 625 million because someone left a developer cred lying around. Wow. That's kind of the story of that robbery. I still find that incredible. So what happened next? This is where it turns a bit weird, I think. So they've got to launder the cash, right? So how did they cash it out? So apparently they tried to extract through some legitimate exchanges, and they got caught, right? Because it can be traced back on the blockchain. This is the Sky Mavis money. You're not checking out here, right? So they then look at how do we go from here? And I don't know whether literally they're in a room in Pyongyang and someone goes, hey, let's try Tornado Cash. But anyway, that's what they did. They go into Tornado Cash and they laundered the rest of the money that way, right? Because it's onward going. That's lost. Well, it's somewhere it bought a nuclear warhead in North Korea. Who knows? Yeah, so this information is quite old, June 2024. There were some money recovered in Norway. Somehow those assets were frozen. I guess that means that the wallet is being looked at and it can't be cashed out. I'm not quite sure. I couldn't find any other information about anything being recovered. So one has to assume this heist was, 3 years ago now? That's, like I say, it's in Kim Jong-un's skyrocket, or metaphorically, virtual skyrocket. So I sort of started making a slide about missed opportunities in these robberies, but then I thought it would be interesting to just sort of make it up. And also it was 2 a.m. last night by this point, and I felt I really ought to go to bed. There's so many missed opportunities, right? And I feel like when I read about these heists, one thing that always springs to my mind is I watch a program in the UK, it's called Air Crash Investigation. I think it's called Mayday in the rest of the world. Whenever you hear about an air crash, anything after the 1950s, right? Which is just, the engine broke and it crashed. These disasters, these modern disasters, they are not caused by a single thing, right? Okay, it's not, you can't say this was the single point of failure. It's like an exploit chain, right? This happened, then this happened, then it was an unfortunate sequence of stuff, right? And to me, that's what those breaches are about, right? It wouldn't have mattered if they pwned that that developer in Sky Mavis if they hadn't have left the developer cred lying around, right? It wouldn't have mattered if they pwned him if they'd have thought a bit more carefully about maybe air gapping the computers, right, that do the voting. In the Bybit hack, that was the first thing that was talked about on the podcast I listened to, which was like, do you not think that if you've got a computer, right, or a thing that you have to do that can move $1.5 billion in currency, why don't you just have a computer that is just for that, right? They do that thing once every 2 or 3 weeks, right? Why don't you have these computers in 3 different safes in different parts of the world and then just use the computer for that, right? It's that much money. Christ, think about what you're doing. And all of these exploits start with the usual thing, right? The weakest thing in your network is the wetware, right? It's the developers, right? And you think about hey, who doesn't want a better job, right? It's going to be tempting, but why wasn't there something on the we all have developer creds, right? Why wasn't there something specific on that? Why wasn't there alerts to show that this developer is suddenly trying to log into every computer on the network, right? That is not a hard query to write in KQL if you're a Microsoft shop or whatever your detection thing is, right? These are obvious patterns. These are obvious IOCs that just were not picked up. And for God's sake, an old developer cred lying around on the network. Really? So, we could go on, but it's a pub conversation, and I can't go to the pub today, so we'll have to stop. So, like any talk, what's the top 5 takeaways that we should learn from these hacks? Do role-specific awareness training, right? It's all well and good having a cyber awareness training program, but have a separate one for your devs. How hard is it to do that? You can make it fun. And a separate one for your high-value individuals like your board, right? They're the ones that are ultimately responsible. Number 2, clean up. Come on. Has anybody heard of Knight Financial? They lost $500 million in about 10 minutes because they failed to clean up their developer flags effectively. That just caused a cascading failure of when they were doing a rollout. Because they didn't clean stuff up properly. Clean up. There's always a trade-off between usability and security, right? Think about those compensating controls, right? Like I say, it's a ball ache to do the transfer on a different computer, but think about it, whatever. Do threat modeling based on MITRE ATT&CK. I was talking about this to a friend earlier. Threat modeling, if you'd have threat modeled the attack vectors in both of those scenarios, you would have closed those weaknesses, I'm pretty sure, right? So I can only assume that nobody looked at the system holistically and said, how would I attack this if I was an attacker? Look at the data flows in your system and the trust boundaries, right? And I can tell you just one tip straight away, but this is the type of stuff we do with our clients is threat modeling exercises, showing them how to do it. If the data flow diagram doesn't closely match the trust boundaries, you've probably got a problem. And there'll probably be some interesting sort of confused deputy attacks available in there. And it's so easy to configure a VM tool for look for keys and old keys and stuff that hasn't expired, stuff that should be cycled. Right? That would have stopped the Axie Infinity hack. I couldn't keep it to 5. I do apologize. Segment your developers' prod access and segment your network. Right? Air gap stuff that you can. Right? That's been around forever, but people don't do it. Right? Why not? If you're dealing with billions of pounds or dollars or crypto. And finally, it's so easy, I've mentioned this already, to write queries that catch unusual activity, right? That's what they're there for, right? That's low rent. All of these things are low rent, really. Actually, threat modeling's not too low rent. If you're interested in that, I can give advice. It's the only advert I'll put in. What happened afterwards? Well, Tornado Cash. As I say, Axie Infinity, the Sky Mavis hack, was laundered through Tornado Cash. The founders of Tornado Cash were convinced they were bulletproof because it was a DAO. We're not taking money out of it. We are not handling anybody else's money. It's headless. It's non-custodial. So what did the US government do? They sanctioned it. It's a piece of code running independently. They sanctioned it. The arguments went on for a long time. People were saying you can't sanction code. And they went after the founders, which in my head is a bit like going after the person who made a knife because someone got stabbed with that knife, right? Or in America, if it's illegal to do what they did, why are gun manufacturers never arrested? It blows my mind, that does. The authorities argued that the intention didn't matter, which is weird because when they closed down all the Phantom Secure and EncroChat, the encrypted phone companies, they argued that they were arrested because they knew they were selling to criminals and they marketed to criminals. This was not. So then what happened? After the sanctioning, somebody, still unknown this person, or at least the last time I checked, put 50,000 US into Tornado Cash and started sending it to famous people and making the world know, hey, these people are now in breach of sanctions. The sanctions said that anybody that interacts with, receives or sends money to Tornado Cash is breaking the law. Lovely. It was a stunt. But then the three founders, Pertsev was arrested in Holland. I think he was sentenced to 4 years. Roman Semyonev was indicted by the US government, but he's believed to be in Russia, so he's probably out of their reach. And Roman Storm was in prison in the US. I'm not sure if he still is. Okay, so, but all of this is hotly contested by the privacy lobbies. Latest news, I just did all this the other day. Pertsev was released from jail. They think it sounds like his appeal may succeed. Semyonov is under the radar. Roman Storm remains under charge, but this announcement came just last month. They are no longer going to pursue cases in which it charges crypto mixers for the acts of their end users, which I feel is sensible. So they're effectively saying, yeah, we're not prosecuting a gun manufacturer for people using it to kill people. And then just in March, the sanctions were lifted from Tornado Cash, not as some act of altruism, but they were proven to be an overreach by the part of the US government that puts them there. Why do I care about this now? Well, when I first heard about all this, I thought it was an overreaction from people about the privacy aspect. But in the UK, there's cameras everywhere. Our government and every government has been trying to ban end-to-end encryption for a long time, right? In February 25 this year, there's a feature in iPhone's advanced data protection. Our government asked for a backdoor. Apple said no chance. And by the way, we can't even give you a backdoor because we can't see these decrypted things. The UK government said you need to give us a backdoor. So Apple said fine and switched off the feature. So it's not available in the UK anymore. Cash is being phased out everywhere. So every time you spend money, it's traceable, right? I haven't spent cash for ages. Crypto's no better because it is traceable. You may not think it is, but it is. And there have been various secure phones, right? Like EncroChat, Phantom Secure. They always get shut down, right? And in fact, they've been hacked by the authorities to catch criminals. And the US government even started a secure phone company called Anom. It's an amazing story. I'm just reading a book about it. They started their own, and they then let it spread throughout the criminal fraternity. They did simultaneous arrests in 20 countries about 2 years ago. It's a great story, Anom. So why should we give a shit, right? Ask me a year ago, I would have said, look, I've done nothing wrong. Why would I care? Well, the American government is now borderline authoritarian. They are ruling by decree. They call them executive orders. They are bypassing the Senate by Trump declared a state of economic emergency, which enabled him to do the tariff business. He couldn't do that without a state of emergency. Everywhere, all over Europe, we are getting more and more right-wing authoritarian people coming to the fore. In Germany, in France, even in the UK, don't think that Nigel Farage's mob are not going to be authoritarian if they get close to the real levers of power. So it scares me. If we can't be truly private, I'm not sure I want to live in that world. Okay, I'll end on that. Those are my primary sources. They're great books on the left. Thoroughly recommend Darknet Diaries and Risky Business. And of course, I got most of the technical specs from Wikipedia. I sometimes wonder if facts existed before Wikipedia. Thank you very much for listening.